Toward the end of Rose's Scabbard, when Amethyst and Pearl get into their screaming match, Pearl blurts out this line.
You can't understand how I feel! None of you had what we had!
And while this moment is clearly not painting her in the best of light, there is undeniably truth in this statement. As, while dealing with Rose's absence is a constant throughout pretty much every character in the show, no two of them experience it in the exact same way. Greg lost the mother of his child, Garnet lost the gem who allowed her to exist, and the list goes on. And while all of these dynamics have their own great moments, no character's existence is more intrinsically tied to Rose than Pearl. Something that makes moving on immensely difficult, and something portrayed in the emotional roller coaster that is Rose's Scabbard. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In this video, we're going to go through all 11 minutes of one of Steven Universe's most discussed quarter hours, and break down how, especially with knowledge of the title character's biggest secret, Rose's Scabbard truly excels at exploring Pearl's everlasting grief.
Now he looks at me when I say his name. Lion! Lion! Hey, Lion!
While discussion of this episode fairly tends to be more focused on its final few minutes, the first scene of this one does such a good job setting up the masterpiece that is to come. And while this does include things such as having the bulk of the episode's jokes, or establishing both a bright version of the Strawberry Battlefield, as well as the fact that this is indeed a Rose and Pearl episode, I think the most impressive attribute of the opening few minutes is just how uneasy they make Pearl's retrospectively positive outlook on war feel. Obviously, Steven Universe, as a cartoon on a kid's channel, is able to get away with a bunch of things because they're gems and not humans, as the show would obviously never actually kill a human. But even that doesn't change the fact that this is a battlefield, one where Garnet and Pearl watch their friends die, and despite this, the latter describes it as if it was some kind of game. This feeling is pretty hard to shake throughout the episode, as the mania scene here from Pearl isn't exactly going anywhere, continuing as soon as everybody makes it back to the house. And it's here where Pearl comes up with the idea to take Steven in an attempt to find the matching blade to the episode's titular Scabbard to Rose's secret armory that nobody else has ever been to or heard of besides Pearl, only for it to be pretty familiar to both the audience and to Steven. About 2 years ago, in a video that you definitely shouldn't go back to, I made the argument that while there is an actual Lion 4, that the real Lion 4 is actually Rose's Scabbard, and I still pretty much believe it. And it's not just the fact that Lion 2 establishes both the armory and Rose's sword, as the primary reason for this belief is that, at their core, the first 3 Lion episodes are about establishing the link between the feline and Rose, ending with both the best scene of the first 44 episodes of the show, as well as the question of how nobody else knew about this connection. A question that serves as the catalyst for the best scene of the first 45 episodes of the show. Before getting to that though, and back to the middle of the episode, there is a lot of discussion of Rose and her secrets, along with the concept of secrecy itself, as Pearl desperately tries to make the relationship that she had with Rose distinct from any relationship Rose had with anybody else. Obviously, we know what secret that Pearl is likely referring to throughout this episode, besides just a cool place to hide weapons, but even without that knowledge of Rose's past as Pink Diamond, it's clear that Pearl sees the litany of things that only she knows about Steven's mother as proof that, even if she did ultimately choose somebody else, Rose's confidant was always Pearl, the person that she told everything, even things that hurt to hear. And when Pearl finds out that this isn't exactly the case, she of course freaks out, and why wouldn't she? Pearl just defined her relationship based on the quality of complete openness between her and Rose, only to immediately be told that that's not actually the case. Just like the painting, Pearl's memory of who Rose was and what their relationship was like suddenly begins to crash down, causing her to lash out at anybody who will listen, leaving Amethyst suddenly pissed off, Garnet surprisingly void of wisdom, and Steven just completely and utterly shocked. A few gorgeous shots of the now dark strawberry field later, something reflective of Pearl's now less optimistic view of the past, and we get to the part of this episode that's pretty much impossible to forget, as Steven tries to fix everything. Obviously, you know what moment is going to get the largest focus in this video, as it's probably in the thumbnail, but every time that I watch Rose's Scabbard, it's Steven's sudden descent after seeing Pearl's face that always hits me by surprise. It'll be a couple of seasons before it's fully confirmed that Steven's cartoonish floatiness is controlled by his emotions, but in full retrospect of this fact, it's pretty damning to see it hit Steven in this moment that, albeit accidentally, it was him who triggered this sudden burst of pain. Obviously, and more so than anywhere else in the show, Season 1 Steven spends a good amount of time being completely clueless about how his words will affect those around him, but all of that fades as he sees the direct consequences of his constant blabbering about how cool and awesome and rose-connected that lion is. Is it fair to Steven that he has to carefully talk about his own dead mother in a way that doesn't set off everybody around him? Obviously not. But in the same way that Pearl being essentially forced to raise Steven immediately after losing Rose also wasn't fair, it's just kind of where things lie. It takes watching Steven come pretty dang close to death to finally wake Pearl up, as she stops running away, only to still refuse to look at Steven, knowing whose eyes she'll see looking back at her. Of course, this only works for a second, as soon as Steven begins to talk, she hears the rose in his voice, deciding to finally open up. Playing Steven, what the audience is led to presume, is an accurate retelling of her commitment to fight for Earth, and more accurately, fight alongside Rose. It's this moment and subsequent lines by Pearl that really drive in the fact that, for the first thousands of years of her existence, Pearl existed solely relative to her diamond, and now that's no longer the case, even if she really wishes that it was. Moving on, you obviously know what moment comes next, but even if it wasn't needed, was there any chance that I wasn't gonna show it? With this whole episode leading to this interaction that feels like it can burst at any time, Pearl drops one of my favorite lines of the entire show, telling Steven that she wonders if Rose can see her through his eyes, only for Steven to immediately top it.
Well, I think you're pretty great.
This episode has already proved that Steven's lack of a filter can definitely cause some pain. But in this moment, after taking a second to try and think of a response to the closest thing he has to a mother asking him if she's a good person, he can't help but just be honest. And this is where it fully hits Pearl, as she comes to the conclusion that, at least for now, seems like the healthiest way to move past Rose, deciding that being there for her son is the closest thing that she can do to being there for her. And if Steven truly thinks that she's doing a good job, then maybe she is. The final montage of this episode, as the terrific I'm Still Here continues to play, see Steven trying to comfort Pearl, and it almost kind of working. And while I would love to talk about the hilarious scene that the episode doesn't show, being Steven walking past all the other mysterious things in Lion's Mane to get to the flag, it's the ending of this one that provides the final gut punch, as the music swells to perfectly set up Pearl giving at least a little bit of a smile to illustrate that she's going to be okay, only for the episode to just cut. At its core, Rose's Scabbard is an episode about secrets. It's why the episode was originally named what it was, and it's something that becomes even more apparent when watching this episode after A Single Pale Rose. Speaking of which, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, while this episode was fantastic when it aired, it truly brings an entire new dimension to this quarter hour when you realize that during all of this time that Pearl spends talking about her past with Rose and all of her various secrets, she's probably thinking about Rose's beginnings as a diamond. Something I'd guess is perhaps the reason that she still looks pretty wrecked at the end of this one, knowing that she'll eventually have to confront that fact in a more meaningful way. Obviously, Steven Universe is not a super subtle show most of the time. With this line from Pearl in response to Steven asking why his mother had so many secrets being a great example.
She had to, Steven. It's the mark of a great leader.
I still really appreciate the litany of layers in the animation of the final minute or so of this episode. In general, these final couple of shots more or less represent Pearl's general approach towards Rose stuff throughout the rest of the show, as while she's both able to distract herself like she does with Steven's magic show, and able to look back at the past in a more positive light like she does when Steven hands her the flag, at the end of the day, when things quiet down and she's forced to really confront it, everything about her and Rose is still devastating. Moving on, there is one more final thing that I do want to mention, which is that while both this episode and this video are largely focused on Pearl, I think you can make an argument that Rose's Scabbard is just as impactful for Steven. This is something that the show has already brought up a couple of times before this point, but it's in this episode that Steven fully begins to understand just how much his mother's passing is still affecting pretty much everybody around him. I touched on it a bit before, but it's still just a really interesting moment to watch Steven, who's just a little kid, realize that he has to be the one to comfort everybody else about his own dead mother. This is something that's kind of played off here as typical cartoon main character stuff, but definitely feels a little bit different after Future. In general, Rose's Scabbard is perhaps the most easily appreciated episode of this show, and I promise that that isn't the backhanded compliment that it sounds like. It's just that, even without knowing all of the ins and outs of Rose's secret past, or Steven's eventual struggle with trying to live up to his mother's legacy, you can still see and appreciate how this episode portrays that feeling of learning that your past wasn't as perfect as you remembered it, and knowing that you'll never again feel that blind nostalgia. And while this type of retrospective character evaluation is something that'll muck up discussion of Rose for the rest of ever, I think the end of this one wraps up the show's take on it pretty well, as while looking back on the past can be beneficial in properly moving on, it's ultimately what's going on now that truly matters. Pearl can spend all of the time that she wants thinking about who Rose actually was or what Rose actually thought of her, but what really matters are her current relationships with those who are still around her, including with Steven, who luckily happens to think that she's pretty great. Anyway, that's about it for me. If you want a more direct way to tell me horrible things about Pearl in the comment section, you can find my Twitter hidden away in the description. But either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in a little bit with probably another video. Thanks for watching.